Imagine waking up tomorrow morning inside a prison cell. You didn't do it. You know you didn't do it. Your family knows you didn't do it. But the jury said you did. The judge said you did. The entire system said you did. And now, 10 years of your life are gone. Your children grew up without you. Your parents grew older without you. The name you were born with is now attached to a crime you never committed. Now imagine something else. One person, one lawyer, one piece of evidence that was always there, hidden, buried, ignored. And suddenly the cell door opens. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This actually happened. And the legal fight that won this man his freedom is one of the most important stories you will ever hear about how justice can fail and how it can be forced to fix itself. Stay with me. Because this story may change the way you see justice forever. Today, we are talking about wrongful convictions. These are cases where an innocent person is found guilty and sent to prison for something they did not do. In the United States, the Innocence Project is a non-profit legal organization dedicated to freeing the wrongly convicted. Since 1992, it has helped free over 375 people. That is over 375 human beings who sat behind bars for crimes they never committed. In the United Kingdom, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, known as the CCRC, receives over 1,000 applications every single year. Every one of those applications comes from someone who says they were wrongly convicted. These are not rare accidents. This is a pattern. And understanding how wrongful convictions happen is the first step to understanding how to fight them. So today, we tell one story. One man. 10 years. And the fight that gave him back his life. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus didn't see it coming. Nobody ever does. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn. He had worked a 12-hour shift at a logistics warehouse on the edge of the city. He came home, ate dinner with his partner, watched some television, and went to sleep. By Thursday morning, his name was in a police report. A violent robbery had taken place 2 streets from his home. A local convenience store had been held up at knife point. The owner, a 67-year-old man, had been assaulted. It was brutal, it was senseless, and the whole community was shaken. The police moved fast. In fact, they moved too fast. A witness, a woman who had been walking past the store at the time, told officers she had seen a man run from the scene. She described him. Medium height, dark jacket. She said he had looked at her as he ran, and that she would never forget his face. 3 weeks later, police showed her a photo lineup. 6 photographs. She picked Marcus. And just like that, before a single piece of physical evidence had been tested, Marcus became the suspect. Now, here is where the law and the science collide, and this part is crucial. Eyewitness testimony has long been treated as gold in courtrooms. A human being looks at a jury and says, "That is the person I saw. That is powerful. That is emotional. That is convincing." But the science tells a very different story. Research from the Innocence Project shows that mistaken eyewitness identification has contributed to roughly 69% of wrongful convictions later overturned by DNA evidence. That is nearly 7 out of every 10 cases. Why does this happen? Because human memory is not a camera. It is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. And that reconstruction is shaped by stress, by lighting, by the passage of time, by the way questions are asked, and even by subtle cues from the people running the lineup. When a witness is shown a photo lineup by an officer who already knows which photo is the suspect, research shows the witness becomes more likely to pick that person, even without realizing it. This is called investigator bias. It is a documented, peer-reviewed phenomenon. Think back to the woman who identified Marcus. She had been walking at night. She had seen someone for just a few seconds, running under street lighting. She was frightened, and she had given only a fairly general description. But she picked Marcus, and the system moved forward. In the United Kingdom, similar problems exist. A set of rules known as PACE Code D governs identification procedures, including video identification parades, known as VIPER. When those procedures are not followed correctly, the identification evidence becomes deeply contested. Courts in England and Wales have increasingly questioned the reliability of eyewitness evidence in light of psychological research. The lesson here is simple but unsettling. A confident witness is not the same thing as a correct witness. Now let's talk about what happened at trial. Marcus had a public defender, a genuinely good person, but one who was overworked, underfunded, and carrying a caseload no single attorney should ever have to manage. They met just 4 times before the trial. 4 times. The prosecution's case rested on 2 things. First, the eyewitness identification. Second, a cell tower record that placed Marcus's phone in the general area of the crime that evening. And his defense? He had been home. His partner said so. But in legal terms, a partner's alibi is often viewed with suspicion by juries. They assume bias. They assume love makes people lie. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon, no footage from the store's camera, because it had malfunctioned 3 days before the robbery and had never been repaired. But there was a witness who looked the jury in the eye and said, "That's him, I am certain." And there was that cell tower record. Let's slow down and talk about that cell tower evidence, because it has destroyed more innocent lives than most people realize. Cell tower data shows which tower your phone connected to at a given moment. It does not show exactly where you were. A single cell tower can cover an area of several square miles. In rural areas, that range can stretch up to 10 miles. In a city, the coverage area is smaller, but it still includes thousands of people and hundreds of streets. So placing someone in the area using cell tower data is like saying he was somewhere within a 5-mile radius at some point during that hour. That is not evidence of guilt. But in a courtroom, especially when it is presented by law enforcement and not challenged by a well-resourced defense, it can sound like evidence. In 2018, the United States Supreme Court addressed cell phone location data directly in a case called Carpenter v. United States. The court ruled that accessing a person's historical cell phone location records without a warrant violates the Fourth Amendment. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, acknowledged that cell phone tracking provides near-perfect surveillance of a person's movements. But Marcus's trial happened before that ruling, and his attorney, stretched far too thin across too many cases, did not effectively challenge the cell tower evidence. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Then they came back with a verdict: guilty. And Marcus stood in that courtroom as the world he knew collapsed around him. Take a moment to understand what just happened. A man was convicted with no DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon, and no video. His conviction rested on a frightened witness who saw a stranger for seconds, and on phone data that could only point to a vague general area. That is how thin the line can be between freedom and a decade behind bars. And this is exactly why organizations like the Innocence Project and the CCRC exist. They examine cases where the evidence does not hold up. They look for what was buried, ignored, or never properly tested. They re-examine eyewitness procedures, retest physical evidence, and challenge science that was misused in the original trial. For Marcus, the fight for freedom would begin long after the verdict. It would take years. It would take a single dedicated lawyer, willing to dig where no one else had looked. And it would take a piece of evidence that had been there all along. Because the most haunting truth about wrongful convictions is this: the system that put an innocent man away is the same system that must be forced to admit it was wrong. And that is one of the hardest battles in all of law. So as we follow Marcus's story, keep these lessons in mind. Memory is fragile. Confidence is not proof. Technology can mislead as easily as it can reveal. And justice, real justice, depends on people who refuse to stop asking questions. This is how wrongful convictions happen. And this is how, sometimes against the odds, they are finally undone.